So welcome and good morning. My name is Linda Griffin. I am the Education Programs Coordinator with BusinessLink here in bright, sunny Calgary, Alberta. And I want to thank you for joining us for our webinar today. Before we begin any of our meetings and webinars, we always begin with the land acknowledgement. So here at BusinessLink, we are honored to provide services to all entrepreneurs and specialty services to our immigrant and Indigenous entrepreneurs. We are inclusive in our cultural understanding and awareness of the histories of our country. We want to acknowledge that in the province of Alberta, we are situated on the traditional territories of Treaties 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10, ancestral homeland of diverse First Nations group, Métis and Indigenous people, whose ancestors have walked this land since time immemorial and whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. We pay respects to the Indigenous people of this land, past, present, and future, while recognizing their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land on which we reside. Thanks for joining us today. Darren Lezubski will be joining us to present Finding Business Statistics on the Statistics Canada website, and his cohort from StatsCan, Desiree Ng, will be working in the chat to insert links and resources that are going to be referenced throughout this presentation. So I wanted to welcome both of them. Shortly, they will introduce themselves. If you wish to ask a question during the webinar, please click on the Q&A in the meeting controls. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you have two options. You have chat and you have Q&A. You're welcome to use chat to gather those links from Desiree and to introduce yourselves and everything in that section. But if you have a question, we're going to be holding questions till the final 15 minutes. And please insert the questions into the Q&A box because I'll be reading those out loud. You can do that for sure. The information provided in this session is for general knowledge and should not be taken as professional advice. We are recording this. You will not receive slides from this slide presentation. You will be able to access this recording on the BusinessLink website within 2 to 3 business days after the recording takes place. So without further ado, we've heard me enough today. Darren, if you'd like to take it away, I'm happy to pass the ball over to you.
Wonderful, thank you. Desiree, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yes, thank you everyone for taking time to join today's sessions on finding business data on Statistics Canada website. Before Darren start his presentation, I just want to acknowledge I physically living in Vancouver. I'm so gratefully able to work and live in this beautiful unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Chiswichans nations. As Linda mentioned, we will talk about resources related to business data, but it is not restricted to what we are going to Darren is going to talk about. We have a various wide range of different data available on the website. So I'm going to pass on the floor to Darren. Darren, over to you.
Hello, bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue. Hello, everyone, welcome. My name is Darren Lezubski, and in the spirit of reconciliation with our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit brothers and sisters, I am in Winnipeg, Treaty 1 territory, and home of the Métis Nation. So welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're able to join us, as Desiree has said. I am going to start the presentation, and as Desiree has alluded to, we are a team, so please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A, and Desiree will try and answer them. And then at the end, hopefully, if I don't go on too long a tangent, hopefully we'll have time to answer questions at the end. So we're going to introduce you to some of the information that's available from Statistics Canada in terms of how people can find and use the information that's available. We're also going to be touching on some of the data that's based on Statistics Canada data, but that is actually housed or included in some additional Government of Canada websites, Industry Canada, and things of that nature. So we'll talk about and we'll delve into some of the more specifics when we go into the website tour, Statistics Canada website tour, and some of the other sources. But the basic agenda today is to introduce you to some of the data sources. So being familiar with and sort of recognizing some of the limitations of the data and the strengths of the data is really sort of crucial sort of foundational element. And that's really the objective today, is sort of for people who are new to Statistics Canada data. One of the reasons Desiree and I do presentations of this nature is because we want to build that sort of that data literacy and statistical capacity to be able to find data and use it as effectively and accurately as possible. So that's sort of the objective and the agenda for today. Before we begin, I just want to spend just a couple of moments talking about Statistics Canada and our role as the National Statistical Agency. So, you know, the Statistics Act, we are tasked with serving Canadians, providing good, reliable, objective information to Canadians so they are able to understand their population, the economy, the culture, all those aspects that are so important to recognizing the strengths and limitations and the opportunities that are available to us. You know, we're one of the leading statistical agencies, and we have the census, which is conducted every 5 years, and we'll talk a little bit about the census. It's probably the most extensive data undertaking that Statistics Canada does, but there are also a host of surveys and other data collection tasks that are going on. At any one time, there's anywhere from 400 to 450 active surveys in the field. Today, we'll be introducing to just a couple of those surveys, most of them that focus on business and business-related data. And again, you know, one of the objectives we sort of place emphasis on with these presentations is just increasing people's awareness so that they know that this information is available to them. It's free on Statistics Canada's website. And we try to demystify some of the intimidation that people sometimes have when they go to Statistics Canada's website and they have a little bit of challenge or difficulty sort of finding what they're looking for. So that's sort of a background in terms of our role and our perspective of what we're going to try and cover today. You know, we highlight the importance of being able to use information as one of the tools, not the only tool, but it's one of the tools that helps you make better decisions. If you're able to quantify issues, if you're able to assess how they're changed over time, how they may be changing in the future, that's information that's helpful to you. So we have information today that will talk about sort of things like market composition, particularly in the concept or the sort of perspective of who might be your target population, what are their demographics, what are their characteristics. Excuse me. We'll talk about some data sources that allow you to measure and assess what people are spending on goods and services. We'll talk a little bit about industry and occupation codes. And again, this comes down to sort of building that foundation. Many of you may be familiar with, and we're in government, so we love acronyms, may be familiar with NAICS, or the North American Industrial Classification System, or the NOCS, the National Occupational Classifications Structure of the System. But we spend some time in these presentations talking about those because that's like the foundation. The way the information is reported is often reported in NAICS or NOCS codes. So just being familiar with where your business or service applies or where it's classified in is helpful to you. And then just being in a position to understand what the data is referring to. So it may not be the most glamorous portion, but just understanding the NAICS codes and the NOCS codes is really helpful. We'll walk you in the website tour, we'll walk you through some of the reference material that helps you sort of drill down and understand NAICS and NOCS codes a little bit further. And then we'll also spend a little bit of time talking about, again, data sources that help you identify labor force characteristics and things of that nature. Financial performance, so these are sort of many of the sources or websites that aren't necessarily Statistics Canada's website, but they're based on, to a great extent, Statistics Canada data. So that's sort of where we're sort of coming from. And then, of course, our role at Statistics Canada, I'm part of the Statistical Information Services. So we work with clients. If you have questions after this session, if some of the data that's available free or publicly doesn't necessarily fit your need, we do also work with clients in terms of custom requests and things of that nature. There's a cost associated, oftentimes not for the data, but for the preparation of the data. But we're able to work with clients in that respect. So we're here and we're happy to help meet your needs and answer your questions. So let's talk a little bit about, excuse me, let's talk a little bit about some of the data sources available from Statistics Canada. And we'll start with the census of population. And as I sort of alluded to in my introduction, census is one of, if not the most extensive data collection activity that Statistics Canada undertakes. And it is the source for detailed data. The richness of the census is its strength. It allows us to have data that's at much smaller levels of geography than what would be available from sample surveys. And I'm not going to turn this into a research methods class, I promise. But you just have to recognize that many of the data sources that Statistics Canada or other statistical agencies are collecting information from are based on sample surveys. So they use randomness as a means of trying to get representative data. But by virtue of a sample is different than a census. A sample is just a sliver of the population. So while it may afford us the opportunity to get reliable estimates, it generally doesn't allow us to get the level of detail at a geographical level, as well as characteristics within certain different populations that the census does. So that's the real strength of the census, is it allows us to get economic and social demographic or social cultural demographic profiles and demographic characteristics about different segments of the population. The census is one of the few sources where you're able to get detailed North American industrial classification and NOx data, North America, the occupational classification data at very detailed NAICS and NOx levels. Again, just by virtue of the size of the population included in the census. But it also looks at things like age and sex and families and labor force, attachment labor force characteristics, household individuals and family incomes, as well as specific populations like lone parent families or immigrants, recent immigrants, the indigenous population. So the census is one of, if you're not familiar with the census, we encourage you to start exploring, to delve into the data a little bit, try to get a little bit more familiar with it. And we do have, or we will have, this specific workshop on how to use census data offered by Statistics Canada sometime soon, hopefully before the end of the fiscal year. So that's just the first data set that we wanted to introduce people to in terms of business-specific data. The census doesn't necessarily provide the type of information people might be looking for with respect to developing a business plan or trying to identify a target population. It's more of a baseline. It's sort of the beginning point for additional research or more specific research. So in addition to that, one of the other surveys we highlight people, particularly as its importance with respect to identifying what people are spending on particular goods and services, is a survey of household spending. This is a sample survey, so it doesn't necessarily have the same level of detail that the census does, but it provides data on households by income quintile. So what lower income quintile and higher income quintiles and middle income quintiles are spending on specific goods and services, whether it be food or bought in restaurants, or whether it be spending on pet food, or whether it be spending on communications like cell phones and things of that nature. The survey of household spending is a really helpful data source at the provincial level. It doesn't have data more specific, but at the provincial level, you'll get to see how some of those characteristics play out, how they've changed over time. So you can look to see the characteristics of the differences between spending amounts on goods and services. So it's a really helpful tool if you're trying to gauge or get a sense of what people are spending on home repair or car repair or things of that nature. So that's an important data source. And as I've said, we'll spend just a few moments talking about the North American Industrial Classification System. As you see on the side here, there's a sort of a hierarchical logic to how the system is classified. And I always like to just remind people, the more detailed the NAICS code, the more detailed the data with respect to the industry that you'll be looking at. And so we start from broad classifications in terms of the activities that are taking place within that industry, and then we refine it further. So accommodation of food, and then we might refine it further to accommodation services, and then maybe specifically to travelers, and then specifically to, you know, hotels and motels and things of that nature. So I know that before the beginning of the session, we were just chatting, and our host was saying that there may be some specific questions, people in terms of the audience in specific industries or NAICS codes. I'm hoping that in the chat or in the Q&A session, we'll be able to delve into those a little bit further. But now we're just sort of starting to give you an indication of how the data is organized, how the information is organized, and how you sort of can make sense of what the NAICS codes are referring to. So we have the NAICS codes, or North American Industrial Classification, and we have NOx codes, or Occupational Classification codes. We also have a whole host of additional surveys, such as the Canadian Business Pattern Survey, that allows us to look at employees or businesses by number of employees, by type of NAICS code, so by type of industrial activity. And this is based on what we call the business registry. So anyone who has a business number, that's classified in Canada Revenue Agency survey. If you have a business number, you're going to be included in the business registry sample, or at least business registry list. And this is where we can start to paint a picture in terms of, as I said, number of employees. There is some data with respect to revenue. There's some data with respect to geographical location and things of that nature. So you can find out sort of, you know, how many businesses there are in a particular industry, in a particular area, down to what we call a census subdivision, or basically what most people call municipalities. So there's free data published twice a year in June and December on the number of businesses by NAICS codes for cities and provinces and things of that nature. So it's really a useful data source to be familiar with, again, as a starting point to sort of even just put a magnitude or quantify how many businesses there are in certain industrial activities. The data source from StatsCan, as I alluded to, can be quite extensive. So not just from industries per se, in terms of the numbers and size and things of that nature, but to specific activities. So two of the key sources, or a couple of the key sources we'll highlight, is trade, as well as retail and wholesale trade. So we have several surveys that we want people to be familiar with. Monthly survey of large retailers, monthly retail trade survey. We have annual surveys that look at retail store data, and as well as wholesale trade. And so this is, again, you're going to have a much better sense of sort of the activity that you're going to be looking for, and what are the different sources that are available to sort of get a sense of how you're comparing, how this is key, how trends are changing over time. This is one of the key aspects of Statistics Canada data with respect to retail or wholesale trade, and to look at some of those factors that might be going into that. There's additional factors that you could look at from the census and other things. So these are key data sources that we want to be familiar with. And this is just, without intimidating too much, this is just sort of the beginning part of your data journey, what the sample size is, what the level of detail is that's available for your particular level of interest. And finally, of course, well, not finally, but one of the other aspects we highlight is, particularly in the context of oftentimes with respect to business data, people may be looking at, well, what type of goods and services, statistics and as import and export trade to the Canadian International Merchandise Trade data set allows us to look at not just the commodities we're trading, but whom are our trading partners? Who is the largest audience or market for particular goods and services? Who are we at sort of that type of data by not necessarily NAICS or codes, but by what we call the harmonization code or HS codes. These are commodity codes, and they're quite extensive, quite detailed, even to the 8 and 10. I don't have in my notes. I should have in my notes. I forgot to write it down. 8 and 10 detailed digit or 6 and 8 level detail in terms of the level of detail supported. So again, we'll try, if we have time, spend a little bit of time pointing to the Canadian International Merchandise Trade Tool on Statistics Canada's website. And then with this too, labor force characteristics and employment characteristics and economic characteristics. So statistics can innovative ways of collecting data in real time or as quickly as possible, as well as looking at some additional data sources with respect to the impact of COVID on businesses. And so we've developed what we have a COVID-19 data hub or data perspective on our Statistics Canada's website. And then within that, there is a whole that we're built up on and elaborated as a means to try and answer questions. So one of the things was looking at business intentions, looking at Canadian business characteristics and business conditions in a quarterly perspective or a monthly perspective. So this has been the result, sort of the silver lining, if you will, of COVID and the increased demand for good data as a result of how we can measure COVID's impact. So the COVID-19 perspective, as I said, on Statistics Canada's website, we look at the economic dashboard as well as the updates on conditions and things of that nature. Canadian Survey of Business Conditions is one of the key sources that is providing information not just on sort of how businesses next little while. Are they expecting to grow? Are they expecting to hire? Are they expecting to shrink? What is the characteristics of business owners and things of that nature? So the Canadian Survey on Business is a really important survey that's emerged that people should be familiar with, particularly in the context of and have. As I said, that's just a sort of a quick introduction to some of the key surveys and data sources on Statistics Canada's website. There are other sources that we'll point you to, and we'll sort of focus on a couple of those right now, and then we'll go into a quick tour of Statistics Canada's website. A couple of the other key sources, and again, much of this is actually based on Statistics Canada data, but it's not solely from Canadian industry. Another federal department provides information that's really key. This is really key for those who are looking at developing business plans or trying to assess the availability of the options for different economic development. So it's got a whole host of different data and data indicators. You could look at how different industries are faring. You could look at this source, and the other source I'll show you will look at revenues and expenditures for different industries. So if you're thinking of starting a business, you're trying to get a sense of what type of availability will I have with respect to staff. It's one thing I didn't touch on in great detail is we're just focusing on business statistics, but there are also labor market indicators, labor market information available from Statistics Canada in terms of the business, in terms of the Canadian Labour Force Survey and the Survey of Employment and Payroll Hours, the CEF survey, and the Job Vacancy Survey. Those are surveys that allow you to get a sense in terms of the Job Vacancy Survey will point to the type of jobs that employers are having trouble filling. Are we looking at labor shortages? Are we looking at labor supply issues? All of those things are in addition to some of the business statistics we're pointing to today. I'm getting off on a bit of a tangent because that's not really the focus of today's session, but those are additional data sources that can be really useful. So as I said, getting back to on topic here in terms of Canadian industry statistics, you can look at business performance, financial performance, GDP impact or GDP size, productivity, salaries, things of that nature. All of that is information that can be crucially important as you're developing business plans and things of that nature. So if I have time, we'll try and look at some of these sources during the web tour, but we often don't have time because we have so much to cover on Statistics Canada's website alone. So I encourage you, if you do have time after the session, I encourage you to sort of explore the site if you're not familiar with it and just see what is there in terms of the amount of information. Financial performance data is another source that is crucially important. And this one is particularly in the context of looking at business plans. So you can look at revenues and expenditures, profits, what type of margins different economic activities are facing, sort of expenditures, what type of expenditures different industries and businesses are facing. And you could look, one of the interesting in terms of size of business, a small business, what type of revenues under a particular portion, what are the for larger businesses by revenues and costs and things of that nature. So financial ratios by the NAICS in terms of understanding the NAICS and whilst you can understand information from other data sources as well. So there's again, it's just a really sort of important additional data source aside from Statistics Canada. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. I think it's, yeah. So I will stop sharing my screen. I'll call up the Statistics Canada's website. But before we do that, I just want to make sure that if you have questions, Canada, we have our InfoStats email here. They will be able to sort of direct your questions to the appropriate division or the appropriate staff within Statistics Canada. And then, excuse me.
So
and then,
Darren,
of course, you're welcome to reach out to us and we'll answer. Yes, please.
So Darren and Desiree, are you able to put in a couple, you had a few slides with a few links to that you just recently showed with the links to where some of the data sources are. So really we're talking here, you're giving us insight into where everything is coming from a data source perspective. I don't know if you can put one or two of the links into the chat so that some of our keeners have those links as well. And as well, we've just popped it. Looks like you've popped it on the screen here as well. So we'll hold here. So if you're watching the recording,
yes. So it's
grab it.
Well, yes, in the next couple of minutes, Darren is going to have a website tool and to share, and to show where you can find the data sources that he just talked about. And the PDF version of the presentations will also be available after the session. So you will have all the link, what you're seeing on the screen here after the sessions beside, in addition to the website navigations. And I will also post the link while Darren is covering the tutorial.
Wonderful.
As well.
Thank you, Desiree. Yeah, so
Fantastic.
Desiree will try and so Desiree will try and post the link. I have to sort of sheepishly admit, I often don't get a chance to cover everything. Like, so for example, I've alluded to the fact that there's a couple of sources. We've got them here on the screen, Canadian industry statistics and things of that nature. We often run out of time, and I do want to leave some time for questions, but so we don't necessarily get to cover everything. But I always remind people that this is, particularly people who are new, this is the beginning of your data journey. So, you know, the fun part about statistics is, and working with data is, it gives so much and asks so little. You just have to do some exploring. And as you explore the data, you'll start to become more familiar with it. You'll start to recognize, this is what this is. You have to be clear on how information is defined. So again, I'm not turning this into a research methods class, but one of the reasons that we focus a lot on terms of reference material from a statistics candidate perspective is because sometimes people may mislead data purposely, but sometimes people mislead data because they've simply misunderstood or not understood how data is properly defined. And so it may not necessarily be that people are purposely trying to mislead. It's that they've simply misunderstood and misinterpreted how the data is defined and what it's actually referring to. So being familiar with the reference material, being familiar with the NAICS codes, all of that is sort of that, as I've said, that foundation that allows you to become is so crucial, because you need to be able to sort of identify good data from bad data. And so that's one of the we just spend a lot of time really need these days. So wonderful question. Thank you for asking. And yes, these are some of the links again, I'll emphasize only some of the links that we're going to point you to, but it's the beginning to your data journey. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to can find or call up statistics. And could someone just confirm that you're seeing the Statistics Canada's website right now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I'm cognizant of the time. I do want to sort of give you a quick rundown of finding a way around. Desiree and I can't tell you how often we've had people come to us after presentations or mention to us, we went to your website and just couldn't find my way around because there's just so much information. So I'm going to give you a quick sort of cursory introduction and a way to maybe identify some shortcuts. If any of you are familiar with behavioral economics, they love to talk about heuristics, you know, how we're able to sort of use shortcut information. I'm going to show you some shortcuts that hopefully will help you find some of the information. And then we'll go into some of the topics I covered, NAICS and things of that nature. So the first thing that is really helpful for people is you can look the Statistics website. If you're not going to Statistics Canada's website, I would encourage you to go to www.statcan.gc.ca and visit it every day. We have a newsletter, which not the most original name in the world, but we call it the Daily. And the Daily is our daily newsletter, which highlights the information that's been released that day. So if I just click on the Daily, for example, it'll show you what has been released today. So, and of course, there's a survey coming up, which we're StatsCan. We always want to collect information from you. I want to say no. And you'll just get a sense of what's been released today. And you're also in a position where you can look to see we've got articles, we've got data releases, we've got, if you scroll down to the bottom, we often have new products, data visualizations, things of that nature. But if there are people who are new to the Daily, one of the things I like to remind them is you can look at the daily release schedule. And the daily release schedule will give you an indication of what's going to be released in the next little while. So if I just go to December 2022, just last month, and click apply, it'll give you an indication of what's been released on release next week, what's going to be released next month, things of that nature. So not everything that we're releasing is going to be here, but it's a good starting point to get a sense of finding or looking for information that's been released as part of the daily. That's just the starting point. I always like to point people to the daily as our daily newsletter. But the other thing I like to highlight is that there's a real sort mobile applications and key indicators, as well as how to access our data, how to find different information with respect to census data and geography and all that. That's wonderful. There's also information about our organization, our mandate, our organizational charts and things of that. And then the different hubs that I refer to. I sort of highlighted the COVID hub, but there are other hubs with respect to gender and diversity statistics, data science, sustainable development goals. That's wonderful. And it's, if you want to spend the time looking through, but you can also find and get to the same information by looking at these tabs along the top of the page. So you'll see I call them tabs. There's a tab called subjects, there's a tab called daily, data, analysis, reference, geography, census, statistical, and survey programs, about StatsCan, and then Canada GC. If you click on those tabs, they'll actually take you to the same information you're able to find by scrolling through the website. So it's a great thing. It's also a challenging thing because people sometimes find information, but then they can't remember, how did I get here again? So it's one of the challenges. So I like to take the simple approach. I like to encourage people to use the tabs as a starting point. So if you're not sure what you're looking for, let's say, I know I want information about business statistics, but I can't remember that survey the title of that survey Darren referred to. How might I go about finding it? If you're starting from that perspective, if you're sort of really vague in terms of what you're looking for, one of the best ways to start is to just go to the subjects. And that will provide a list of all the 31 sort of key topics that Statistics Canada collects information on. And one of them, of course, is business performance. One of them is business and consumer information, as well as the hubs. The hubs that I showed you earlier on the StatsCan webpage, as you scroll down, well, you can also access them through the subject tab. So if I wanted to look at specific information with respect to business and consumer services and culture, if I click on that, it's going to take me to a homepage that points me to some of the data sources we've already alluded to. Business and consumer information. This will point you to some of the key tools that are available, as well as key indicators. So that's one of the quick ways to find information in terms of business and consumer services. The other one is business performance and ownership. So we can look at business dynamics, business ownership. One of the sort of emphasis, if that's a word, one of the emphasis that Statistics Canada is placing is to provide more detailed information about characteristics of business ownership. So for example, business ownership by male, females, by Indigenous population, by recent immigrants, by racialized communities. So this is sort of one of the efforts that Statistics Canada is working on in terms of providing more detail about who owns businesses in Canada, as well as information on financial performance and things of that nature. So these are two of the key starting points with respect to looking at business-related data on Statistics Canada's website. Representation of women on boards and directors and visualization tools that we have. So that's one of the key starting points. And that's under the subjects tab. So again, if you're not clear of where specifically you're starting from, this is often the best place to begin. If you do have a sense of what data you're looking for, you can go to the data tab. And here, one of the advantages is that the data tab has the list of all the different surveys that Statistics Canada collects information for. So one of my initial slides talked about the fact that we have 400, 450 surveys. If you have a rough idea that you're looking for information for the survey of household spending, you can come here and click on the survey, and you'll be able to get specific data tables from that survey. And that'll allow you to delve right into the data. But you have to have an inkling of what you're looking for.
I
And
saw
so you
one.
just have, yeah,
I
please.
saw one,
No, do you want, yeah,
Darren.
please. Yeah, point.
If you scroll up, it was the business conditions for travel and accommodation or something. It was business conditions for something. Business conditions for the traveler accommodation industry. So a survey like this, would it tell me, for example, what's it telling me if we open that survey up?
Let's look.
Okay.
So in parentheses, there's two. So there should be two data tables. And so there's two data. So just as an aside, if you see in that little parentheses, it says the number there, that'll tell you how many data tables that are associated with that service. So you saw the one above it had, I think it said 17 tables. This one said two tables. So this one, and the objective, or the sort of the key aspect here is this is taking you directly to data tables. So we've got information with respect to business conditions survey. And so these are both older surveys. They've archived. So when you see archived, it means the data hasn't been updated. That might be a survey that we're no longer collecting, or things of that nature, or it may have been a one-time survey. So you can look to see what the data is actually referring to. And you can go to the data table. I don't want to take too much time, but if you go to Statistics Canada's data tables, and this is going to be true for any table on Statistics Canada's website, archive one and active one, you can look to see what the frequency is. So it's quarterly. You can see when it was last updated. So 2010 was the last time this table was updated. And you can also look to see what actual variables were included. So this is a question with anticipated number of rooms booked, anticipated occupancy rate by quarter. You can also go, and again, this is true for any data table, you can go to the Add Remove button. And you click on the Add Remove button, and here you can refine your data search. So anything that has a plus sign in front of it would allow you to refine your search. None of these is going to be an archive table, so there's nothing here, but this allows you to, let's say I want only data for a higher and I don't want lower. I can simply deselect them and apply, and I can simplify, or maybe I want all of them. And so you can select the variables that you want included in your table, click apply, and then that will be available to in the table that gets produced. For example, I might want to refine my reference table, the reference period to go back to 2008. I can click apply, and the table will be updated back to 2008. And
so
I could,
as a business owner, I
Yep.
would be, because this is pre-COVID and quite dated,
yes,
I would be much more interested in what the heck is going on now and what are the expectations now. I think Desiree's put in the chat link the infographic on the highlights of the results of fourth on business conditions future forward. So future forward would be of interest, I think, for a lot of our participants, as opposed to real historical content. This is already
Definitely.
feeling a bit dated. So how do we deal with that in a case like this if we want to know, well, what do we expect business conditions to look like based on this data?
So that's a fantastic question. And as I said, Desiree and I are a team. So the one challenge is when I'm presenting, I can't see the chat. So I'm a little bit blind. So I don't know exactly what she posted, but if you go to the link that she posted, you'll be able to do exactly what if it's a data table, you'll be able to do exactly what I've done here. You'll be able to go to the Add Remove, and you'll be able to refine the information that you're looking for. You'll even be able to look to see if there's reference information. So if you go to the bottom of any table, there'll be information on the source and any related products. So you click on source, it'll tell you the actual source. And if you click on that, it will take you to some background information about the survey.
Okay.
So it'll talk about key target population, key definitions, and things of that nature. And that's true for this archive table as well as the most recent table, the link that Desiree has provided.
Okay, I won't spend too long here then. Carry on.
No,
I just
that's
thought
okay.
I'd ask as a curious business owner looking at, and I find that too with a lot of, this is what we would call secondary market research, is we're looking at a lot of historical information. And some of the challenges we find with that is that if it's pre-COVID information, so much has pivoted post-COVID in some of these industries.
This is really true. And as I said, I always sort of jokingly that I'll try not to turn this into a research methods class, but you've touched on a key concept here, what the difference between primary data and secondary data. And so when you're talking about Statistics Canada or Industry Canada data, that's secondary data. Primary data is data you're collecting yourself, and you might be in a position of doing that as part of a business plan or some of the other things. Secondary data is data that's been collected by others that you can use and help sort of understand the context and things of that nature. And understanding the context pre and post COVID is really crucially important. Now, that's sort of one of the reasons why I alluded to the fact that during COVID, we started to develop as an agency some additional data sources that tried to answer some of the questions that we simply weren't in a position to be able to answer before that. And so we took the philosophy that some data is better than no data. And there's always lag in the data. That's just the nature, although we're trying as a statistical agency to sort of reduce that lag, but we can never, we will never sacrifice quality for expediency. So we'll always get sort of complaints about, wow, that data is, you know, months old or a year old, but you know, we've moved towards, you know, flash estimates for the GDP, as opposed to the old way where we made sure everything added in the input-output tables before we released anything. So we're trying to be more accommodating, but we do always have to sort of stick to the data has to be good before we can release it. Again, that's a bit of a tangent, but it's just an important consideration for data users in terms of the data that's available from StatsCan and some of the limitations. This is just, again, this is just an example. And this, I encourage people to sort of, you know, it's a little bit harder online, but I encourage people to ask questions and to delve into, because we want you to get as much as you can from these sessions. So if there's questions or concepts, and let's explore this, yeah, let's do it. And being online affords us the opportunity to do that. So that's just one quick survey that's available. Again, it's an archived survey, so it is sort of not being updated. And as I said, if you ever see that archive, that's what that means. It's not a survey that's active or being updated. So you know that if, hey, where's the data more recent than 2010? There isn't any. So that's just one of the limitations. And wasn't what I was planning on talking about, but it's one of the realities of research, is you're sometimes going to run into a situation where the data is not as updated or as relevant as you would like. Sometimes it's not going to be specifically matching your NAICS or your business activity. That happens. Sometimes you have a unique activity that doesn't necessarily match a specific NAICS code or NOx code. You just have to look at what's going to be the closest to you. And that's why it's really important understanding sort of the NAICS and NOx and sort of how they're classified and things of that nature. And in fact, if I go to the home page here, and again, just before we wrap up, the analysis and the reference section. The reference section is really crucial because reference, even though it's not the most exciting reading in the world, it's the source foundations, the user guides, it's the technical guides that provide that sort of understanding of how the data is being defined, what changes have taken place over time. Are there changes in the data collection methodology or the question wording that impact comparability? So I want to make sure that if I have data for 2016 and 2018 and 2021, were there changes that make the comparability incompatible? You need to know that as a data user, because you don't want to be using information that shouldn't be compared. So this is why reference information can be so crucially important with respect to understanding all the different data sources that are available. And so I always encourage people to look to see if there's a user guide or a technical report associated, and there almost always is a user guide or a technical report associated survey you're working with from StatsCan, survey of household spending, labor force survey, all those have user guides that we encourage people to be familiar with. You can download them in PDF formats. Again, they're not the most exciting reading in the world, but they're really useful for making sure you're using the information accurately and effectively. I'm cognizant of the time, but I do want to sort of, I'm going to go to the, I just want to take people and show people if they search NAICS on the Statistics Canada's website, for example. I just want people to be familiar with the classification tool that's there and sort of how you drill down to sort of get additional details. This is for the NAICS, the classification system. And, you know, we've got the broad categories. If I want to know more about, you know, personal trainers or anything of that nature, well, first I have to think about what NAICS am I going to fall under? So that can be the sometimes. So let's just assume it might fall under healthcare and social assistance. So these are broad categories. So if I want to expand them, simply click on the code, and it's going to allow us to sort of explore them in greater detail. And you can start to explore in greater and greater detail. It comes back to that notion: the more detailed the NAICS, the more detailed the information. And then we can start to see and explore and just try and see, is my activity fall under this NAICS or does it fall under that one? And sometimes you just have to do your exploring. You'll get a sense in terms of what the industry encompasses with a brief description, but sometimes you have to sort of explore on your own and just get, you know, sometimes there, as in any research endeavor, you sort of go under a blind alley and then you realize, oh, that's not what I was looking for, and you got to go back. But that happens. So it's not as kind of dry as textbooks sometimes make it seem to be. So that's, I want to leave time for questions. As I said, this is why we never actually get to everything that we hope to, because there's just so much that we could cover as part of what's available from Statistics Canada's website. So with that, maybe I should stop, and maybe if we can, maybe we can open it for questions. And if there are additional questions people would like to explore, Desiree and I would be happy to do that. So with that, with the time remaining, let's see if there's any questions.
Okay, so one of the questions we have is, does StatsCan collect information on nonprofit businesses as well? So we went through for-profit.
Yes, in fact, the National Accounts has just yesterday, I think in the daily yesterday, there was the information, it's called satellite account on nonprofit industry, the voluntary sector. And so to give you an indication of GDP, number of employees, types of activity. So I think my days sometimes get into a blur. But I think there was a release yesterday on the satellite accounts from national from the voluntary sector.
Is there a way for us to just, if you were to be on the website like you were, to type in the word nonprofit and see what shows up? Like that would seem intuitive to me. So how would we do that if we were on the main site you were just on and wanted to look up information on nonprofits, for example, and didn't want
to? You go to the search. I'm just going to show you that just yesterday was the Nonprofit Institutions Voluntary Economic Contribution Report that was released in the daily. So, and I'll show you shortly, but so here's the report. This is the daily. It gives you an indication of the impact of nonprofits, the voluntary sector, with respect to GDP and things of that nature. And then there's a list of data tables that you can look at. So we can look at the GDP product by nonprofit institutions by subsector. So if I would open this, here's a table that, you know, again, the same idea, add and remove data. But you can look to see by the different types of non-sectors, sectors, and by different levels of geography. But if I wanted to, I could just go to the search. Okay, this is just between us, right? This is, I sometimes hear people say, well, StatsCan's search isn't very good. You know, you can go to Google and type the search and it'll point you to StatsCan website as well. But you didn't hear that from me. Go to Statistics Canada's website. You can use the search function. You can type in nonprofit. You can type in voluntary sector. Those would be the beginning points. But this is one of the data sources. I just wanted to show you, if you come to a data table, and if you see a plus sign in front of a variable, that means if you double click it, you'll be able to get more detailed information. And if I wanted to look at the subsectors, so for example, these are the different subsectors. There's more detail for government nonprofit institutions. This will tell me whether it's health or education and things of that nature. So, and that's just one example of voluntary nonprofits that you could do for a whole host of others. Sorry, I don't know if that answered your question.
It did. And Desiree, did you have anything to add? I noticed you sort of trying to jump in there at one point.
I never let her jump in.
Well, sorry for interject, and we are searching for the national the satellite again that Darren's mentioned. I just post the link directly at the chat, so to helping everyone to locate the article. So that's what Darren's trying to correspond to. So
and it's another reason to subscribe to the daily, right? You get all of these releases and all of that information for sure. We have another question. This is our soft hi, Rob. It was nice to see you yesterday and today, but this is definitely software building material. Is there a way to access StatsCan data via an API if we wanted to build our own? So where would he go for the app, the information for that?
So well, I shouldn't have been so cavalier. We're moving towards the API, though I can't remember what it stands for, but the people who want to do web scraping and things of that nature.
Yeah.
There is, I believe it's under, if you go to About StatsCan, and About StatsCan, sorry, do you know off the top of my head, do you know where I think I'm going? There is a reference with respect to it here somewhere. I just can't remember where it is.
Yeah. It's just been posted at the chat.
It's
the API
wonderful.
User guide. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Guide.
Yes.
Yeah, he needs
so there is that, and there are a host of sort of download options that are available for people who are looking for data tables, but there are people who are looking for sort of, what's the XMLI, the format to drop into databases and things of that nature, or web scraping the API. So there is that, but I shouldn't have been as cavalier. We're moving towards it, but I don't know how developed it is. But yeah, please look at the link that that Desiree posted. That should give you at least an introduction in terms of statistics. Now, StatsCan, of course, we have privacy and confidentiality concerns that are always at the utmost for us as the National Statistical Agency to keep in mind.
I think
any other questions? I know we're running short on time, but any other questions?
I think some of the biggest challenges, I know that when we deliver our market research here at BusinessLink, some of the bigger challenges we have for some of our clients is that they're in industries that aren't necessarily visible. When you first try to look up that NAICS code, you see the major categories, and then you have someone who says, well, I am part of a team, we run a healthcare business where we have an acupuncturist, a chiropractor, we have a physiotherapist. We're all built into one clinic. What on earth NAICS code does that fall under? And that becomes a real challenge for people. So how do we deal with that? Do we start with healthcare and drill down, or how do we deal with that?
Well, and this is my perspective. Like I always sort of start when I teach research methods. I would say, okay, start with univariate analysis, then you move to multivariate analysis. So start simple. So where would it likely fall under? And oftentimes it doesn't necessarily fall under that NAICS, but people will generally have a good hunch of where the broad categories is the starting point, obviously. So the broad categories give you an indication in terms of how the economy of Canada is structured with respect to broad economic activity, and then you just go from there. And sometimes you will find that like fintech or those type of industries, people are really struggling in terms of where it falls, what NAICS code am I, cannabis, we had to develop new ones for those. So if it's really unique, and it sounds like the example you're using is really unique, it may actually, and one of the challenges may actually fall under two different NAICS codes. Those type of activities may be classified under different NAICS codes. And that's a reality that sometimes happens as well. So you need to think about what proportion of activities is sort of the main activity, those type of realities. But yeah, you just got to sort of explore. And as you become, the nice thing is as you become more familiar, like I said, if I wanted to explore the educational services NAICS codes, the one nice thing is you can start to look at the description of the industry. You'll get a chance in terms of looking at the display. If I want to look at more detail, you just have to sort of explore and go into more detail in terms of what exactly is being defined. So technical schools. I want to know more about what exactly those might be. You just have to keep drilling down,
Great.
and you'll start to see more and more details, up to a limit, obviously, of how they're defined and what exactly is included. So the key here is to recognize sort of this, what type of establishments or industry activities are included or comprised with that code.
Great. So let's, because we're wrapping up here, if you're able to put in contact information for StatsCan, if people want to sort of, yeah, I like that too. All examples of the selected NAICS is very helpful as well. And just I've had to do hit and miss searches as well, just to find it. Because maybe the word personal trainer is not in there, but it falls under something else. If you type, you can type in the word too, and sort of,
you could,
yeah, and find yourself challenged with it. So you have to kind of, I've had to do that too, spend a few minutes digging around for different terminology in different sections to really find yourself in there.
And I readily admit there may be more efficient ways to do it. I'm sometimes, I don't know if I should admit this publicly, I'm one of the work harder, not smarter. So there may be more efficient ways to do it, but sometimes it's just a good old fashioned get familiar what's there. And as you become more familiar, it gets easier.
So a reminder to everyone, Desiree, are you putting the link to the downloadable PDF of this into the chat for everyone, or is that coming to me to send out?
It is going to send it to you after the session.
Okay, so I'm going to get that and I'm going to send it to everyone who attended today. So you'll all get a copy of that. I'm also going to request everyone, when I send that follow-up email to you, please complete the Business Link survey on today's session so that we get feedback from you on how the session went today, and we'll ask just some few basic questions. It's a 25-second long survey. For those of you who attended market research yesterday, you're going to get an email on that along with this. So you'll get 2 emails with 2 surveys and lots of detail today from me as well. Really, thank you both for sharing this information today with everyone who's subscribed to the Business Link newsletter, and now is probably going to subscribe to the daily, because that's where all the good stuff comes in from. The information is in the chat, so I'm going to leave that open for another minute or two for people to collect links and put them in their favorites tabs. As well, you've got information how to contact StatsCan, and you have as well all sorts of opportunity to contact Business Link. Any of our business strategists can help you, and our market research department can also assist you with a lot of this type of information gathering as well, because it can feel a bit overwhelming. Other than that, I think we are done. Thank you, everyone.